Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning back in. I have Casey Brown on the show today. I can't tell you how much fun I had. She's become a dear friend. She's one of the world's best experts on pricing, has been talking about pricing your products and services to get paid what you're worth for over 25 years. And she is so amazing. I learn so much every single time I talk to her. If you want to know more about her and what we're going to be talking about, check out the show notes below. If you are enjoying this podcast, please share this with a friend. Help me spread the word. And if you have enough patience, go to the podcast player you're listening to this on. Give the show a review. It means the world to me. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And I really hope you enjoy this interview with Casey. What's up, Casey?
Hi, Ryan.
This is going to be too fun. I'm glad we didn't have that on record because I think those backroom conversations are for us.
Yeah, although everybody listening has those kind of conversations with their other friends that are owners.
Yes. You had said that you'd listen to my podcast and you were in my head and like, poor you. But now we're both, so like, I don't know if you're going to listen to this one and you're going to be in both of our heads. So that sounds like some trippy experience, but anyways, I digress. We will put the link to your previous conversation with me in the show notes. I was thinking a lot about like how we want to take this conversation. And so what I actually did is I was texting a bunch of my clients and friends this morning and asking them questions. So I have an inventory of questions over here that we can start ripping through. But before we do that, I don't know if you want to just kind of level set people that haven't checked out your previous episode that is on YouTube now, but a little bit about you, Boost Pricing, kind of your background, and then we'll just jump into it.
Yeah, sounds great. So I'm a pricing geek. Didn't set out to be one, didn't know that was a career, but found my way accidentally into this space about 25 years ago and really fell in love with it. Initially because it's this fascinating intersection of art and science and people and process, data and psychology. But as I started my business and have helped, thousands of entrepreneurs and leaders and business owners through better pricing, I have grown to love it for an even more important reason, which is to me, not just that it's this fascinating, interesting discipline, but it's the discipline that can make the biggest difference to profitability, the quickest, which for business owners and leaders who develop and deliver excellence to their customers, if they have excellent products and services and they're being underpaid for that excellence, it kind of strikes a nerve with me, rooted in injustice of letting the customers keep your money that you could use to grow, innovate, hire more people, add new products, acquire business. I'm listening to, your previous episodes of this show and certainly other shows you've done in the past. This idea of, letting owner operators, have a job that they love instead of a job that they hate, and they don't have to, punch out and pull the ripcord and do a exit. Some of the things that would be necessary for them to love being an owner of their business require money. Whether it's hiring another person to sit in their seat or anything else they want to do that makes their life better and easier. All those things can be funded and paid for out of relatively modest price changes that they already have the ability to do because they have done the hard work of developing excellent products and services. So I'm fired up.
That's awesome.
And that's what we do.
Yeah,
And that's what I talk about on the.
Have you noticed that because as I've been diving down these topics for years too, Casey, I mean, if you're helping people make more money and you're helping the right people, you're just helping the right people get to their goals faster. It's just like this rocket fuel behind. They have to have clear goals. Not always the case, but I appreciate your geekiness on this, and I think as we jump into some of the, I think we could just start with these Q&A, Casey, because I think there's a lot of truth to a lot of the questions that people have in there. But before we jump into some of these, what percentage or what's the right thought process of you talk a lot about psychology too. And I think in our last conversation, it was a lot of get out of your own freaking head, provide the value, be confident in the value and then there's the data, right? And then there's all the mechanical challenges. I'm kind of curious, how do you think about those two categories?
So I'm a consultant, so I make up statistics all the time. And the one, the-
So I don't know how that's any different than anybody else in the public figure.
so the one I'm about to invent is rooted in my latest whims on this topic. But uh, I'm going to say today, I've said in the past 50-50, but today I'm going to say 75% of successful execution of pricing is rooted in mindset and confidence, and only 25% in getting the number right or what's in the spreadsheets. And I'll just elaborate a little bit. I've been in the pricing space for 25 years, as I mentioned, and I believe most pricing decisions in the world are made from a place of fear, not from a place of confidence. A lot of times we're making pricing decisions in this way of like, I don't want to lose the business. I don't want to have the customer say no to me. I don't want to lose the deal. And so that's a very defensive strategy. It's like we're pricing not to lose rather than pricing to win. And so it's call it a scarcity, call it fear, call it whatever you want to. There's a lot of head trash and emotion and self-limiting beliefs driving pricing decision making, and standing in front of the customer whose job it is to get it for less, no matter who you're selling to and what you sell. They're going to be, beating you up on price, sometimes very gently and sweetly, and sometimes very aggressively. And we discount and we underprice and we sell from fear. So, 75-25 is my number today. Not that skill set and logic and data and being equipped with the right process and the right tools and the right things to say aren't important, but all of that stuff is meaningless. You're standing in front of the customer, you can be, know exactly what to do and what to say, but if you won't do it or can't do it because you are operating from a place of fear that I'm going to lose this business, then it doesn't matter how well trained you are or how much how fantastic your skills and your data is.
Yeah, I love it, and I like it's I've interviewed Chris Voss, the negotiation guy, and a bunch of other things that I could pull on. Like before we get into some of the more specifics, I think understanding where you need to be is the most important. Like, how do you know where to negotiate unless you know what you need? And like that's where I think I like even on these on M&A transactions, Casey. I mean, I deal with at least at any given point in time, it's probably a third of the people I'm talking to or working with have got an out of the blue offer, and they don't know what the hell their company's worth. I'm like, how do you trade an asset if you don't know how valuations work? I mean, it's absurd. So like just knowing what you're worth, back to I think kind of one of your big MOs, right? Is like you have to know what you're worth, but then also what you need, right? So like I was on a client call. It's like, okay, well, if you need X amount, 25K a month in distributions, and then you have to have this much funding, and then you pay this in taxes, like this is all you got left over. And like, you have to say no to the shitty clients and you have to have these pricing, like otherwise it doesn't work. And then you're negotiating against yourself. And how much do you think that is that people don't know what I just described versus it's true fear? Because I think there's like maybe two. Does that make sense? Because like sometimes it might be fear, or sometimes it's ambiguity that they don't know what they're negotiating against.
There's two answers I want to give to that, and the first is actually an answer to a question you didn't ask, but it's a slight reframing of what you shared, and I 100% agree with you. I think uh, what we need, what we have to have as business owners or as a business, like, hey, we can't go below X margin or X dollars on this product or service because below that we're not making money, and or we're not making enough money for the owner's requirements or whatever. Like I gotta have at least this, that sets the floor, that sets the walk away point. That's an important point to know. However, in my, I believe like that is the floor. That's not the ceiling, and it shouldn't be the target.
Right.
Like the
Right. Right.
ceiling or the target is like,
Don't shoot for the floor.
right.
Yeah,
Look,
exactly.
I mean, nobody listening to you is that person. Those are the
I hope
bottom
not.
feeders out there. The people that listen to you are the best in class and better in class companies in their industries. And what that means is we should always be shooting for like not just what is our walk away point. We got to know that. We got to have that data in our back pocket so that we, can bound our decision making. But to
Hmm.
me, where companies really struggle the most is, where is that ceiling? And the reason I
Hmm.
say they struggle
Hmm.
the most is most of them are never even anywhere close to it. They're really kind of operating in the middle or bouncing against that floor a little bit. And so
Hmm.
understanding that, value sets the ceiling, my walk away point sets the floor, testing that ceiling, finding where you're actually bumping up against the market price. I say all the time, and it sounds counterintuitive to people that hear it, but no's are knows, losing customers and losing business over price is an important part of a good price strategy. If you never lose over price, you don't have any idea what the market will pay you. So you've gotta lose business sometimes, and you've gotta get price objections sometimes to know where that you gotta try to map out that space basically between that walk away point where I'm like, "I just won't do the work for less." That's a very different number than, "What is the most I can get this market to recognize my value at, and I wanna be charging that as much as humanly possible," and mapping that space out and getting that as much as possible.
Well, and I think about like some data that would help me because I remember when I got multiple personal stories about having to deal with that. Where like I told family business, they call it like 3,000 customers, and they were like a bunch of the shittier ones, and the whole Pareto principle of like how many people are losing money, blah 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 blah. Like, but like I could think about like data that would help me in that situation. Say, how do we want to organize this pie chart of customers more towards that ceiling? So every one of those conversations is more of a I'm okay with the no because I'm pruning to get more of those yeses, but like what's the ratio and the data to help me understand the context of that no instead of because I don't want to operate out of that fear, but I've done this shit. I mean, I've been a salesperson my whole life. It's like, the copier training is sell shit for less monthly payment.
Yeah, right. And
It's just
and
like,
the like some of the classic sales chestnuts of like, well, 100% of 5,000 is better than 0% of 7,500, and like we talk ourselves into accepting lower prices, and the reason we do that is because fear is omnipresent in sales. But to your point, how do we make, if we're not going to make fear-driven decisions, what kind of decisions can we make? And I would say, at the highest level, it's value-based decisions, but a more sort of tangible version of that is data-driven decisions. And I think what you're asking for is like, what are the sort of the math or the tools or the analytic support that you could wrap around your decision making to shore it up and make sure you're not making fear-driven decisions, you're making data-driven decisions. And I would say there's a number of them. And I think I've got this book coming out next quarter, and the entire fifth part of the book is dedicated to the what I call focusing tools, which is really like using data to go after the exceptions and the problems and identify those to manage risk. Because what we're really talking about here is risk management. Like you can find out how much the market is willing to pay you and find out that ceiling really fast if you're willing to risk losses faster. Many businesses understandably aren't willing to risk a ton of volume. And so this question to me is fun, like of mapping out your pricing power is fundamentally a question of your risk tolerance. And some of that is very, just the sort of personal risk tolerance of the owner, the leader, the sales leader, the salesperson. But there's also like factors in your business that can point to the risk. So for example, if you're a consulting firm that has a dozen giant gigs a year, maybe your 50% win rate. So you're bidding on, or proposing on 25 or so deals a year. You're going to have I would advise you to have a very different strategy about how bold to be with your pricing mapping exercise than if you are a distributor that has, 4,000 transactions a day, right? With 100,000 customers. In other words, and this kind of gets back to that, like, which of our bad customers on our Pareto or like, it does not just like what's that Pareto look like, but what's the magnitude of your at bats? If you have a million at bats versus few, how frequently do customers rebuy from you? Right?
well, because like
All
I think
kinds of
about that
factors
because
like
like
that.
it's the back to like the remember Office Space where he just siphons off like a quarter or
A
a
fraction of a
percentage of a
penny.
penny.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like yeah, so like in that if you're manufacturing, you're pumping out widgets. I mean, a 1% increase could make a huge impact versus you have 12 conversations. One conversation with a 1% increase could blow up. The magnitude of that would be huge. And yeah, so like I love where you're going with this with the data versus the confidence because I think so many people I think are capable of having these conversations, but like I think the data is missing behind like, and that's maybe what we can kind of as we can continue having this conversation. Like I would believe that like so our friend Reed, I texted him, so he's on this list, and then I've got my buddy Jimmy who saw you at Allied. It's like some of my most high performer clients and friends, and like I would assume get this psychology and they have done this. And here's where I start to see the shifting of this happen, Casey, is cash flow is diminishing from the economy because the consumers, because of interest rates, all this stuff that is outside of their control. And who, like one of my clients that's in commercial cleaning, what was more of a value-based sell, she's like, man, it is brutal out there right now. So like, I guess saying that because like, people can go check out our previous conversation because I 100% agree with the 75-25. And like, I even believe that even if you have all this shit and all the data and even it's bad and all that stuff, I also probably lean towards you're right still. And so like,
Say it
and
again,
like,
louder into the microphone.
you don't get that told that enough. You're
I
right
mean, who's
still.
ever told that enough? No, of course not. I'm a mother of teenage kids. They tell me all the time how wrong I am. Just say that one more time.
Amen. We were talking about that. Daddy, why did you do this to me? No, I'm right. So like I still believe that, like, and I'm having all these caveats, Casey, because I do believe that the psychology is a huge order of magnitude more important. But then there are certain realities of like your industry is becoming a commodity. The consumer doesn't have enough money. There's a shrinking industry. And so, okay, in no particular order, I was just kind of thinking about pulling on one of these threads that I think related to what you were just saying is, so let's see here. It's about this value-based pricing. So I got a couple clients that are in the services space. And let's see here. So I'll kind of walk through a couple of them. And then we can figure out how you want to slice it. So like you
Sure.
can just, you don't have to
I can
lob them out
thematically
right away.
answer it. I get it.
Yeah. So like one of my buddies, two or three of these are professional services, and I would love to know what professional services businesses and the high ticket value services that they're selling is the best. Is it best to have levels so that people can know, hey, I've seen this before, or this is better to have any custom solution that involves a lot of time to come up with the price. And so it's kind of like the different levels of services. And then that I think that ties right into the next one, which is, of course, he's the perennial pricing question I have and now you, Ryan. So he's shoving it right back at me, is value pricing of subscription professional services and how lawyers, accountants, coaches, consultants can move from hourly prices to subscription based on a recurring value. So I think this whole like value professional services, but I think one thing on top of this, and maybe this ties into this, Casey, is like what I have done to try to overcomplicate or to overdo this, and I think I overcomplicated it for a decade, was I'm going to educate the shit out of the listener, my customers, so that way I don't have to beg. And then, like, it took 10 years and I don't think it's actually the right approach, but I think it's this, like, I look at investment bankers or like the best of the best consultants or advisors. It's really hard to differentiate between the shitty people out there that are providing no value and the people that have done the hard work because the messaging is all the same. And like, I look at like, so that's one part of this, but then also investment bankers who are really good. I mean, they pay for themselves 10x more, but like the customer doesn't know what the hell they do. So there's this whole like education / how do you then move to a value-based pricing? So there's a lot there, but any thoughts on how you want to tackle this?
Yeah. First, I'd like to request that you clear the rest of your day because we have a lot to talk about. Every one of these examples, questions, sub questions could consume the entire rest of our time. So I will.
By the way, Brian from ITR Economics always goes, "You did it again, Ryan." Like I just asked, like
I know.
Come on, just give me all of the answers.
If anybody's watching the video of our talking, I'm looking down. I'm not checking my phone. I'm taking notes on some of the things you said, so I can try to remember to come back.
That wasn't all the questions
either. I know. Well, so a couple things. One is like this question. I will thread the first two scenarios together a little bit. So this idea of like, should we sell levels or packages or whatever? And then like, how do we do subscription, especially in industries like you mentioned, accounting and attorneys and whatever, which are used to buying the billable hour. A lot of companies trying to get away from that. Lots of good reasons to do that. There's this question of like the structure, right? Like what is the right structure? Because if you sell a widget, it's easy. It's the widget, right? Or a package of widgets or a case of widgets or a pallet of widgets. But if you are selling a service, it's often really tricky to figure out what's the right package structure, unit of measure, right? Like, so, I love the instinct to move away from the billable hour because the challenge around billable, I mean, there are many. I have a video. I can send you a link.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's the 12 reasons I hate selling by the hour. And so I won't
Only
regurg
12? Only 12?
well, I tried to keep it under 2 minutes.
I'm just joking.
I mean, yeah, I won't regurgitate all 12, and I think the problems with selling an hour of your time are probably obvious to everyone. The question is, how do you solve it? Um, and this is where I'll thread it back to the sort of packages and levels thing. There's a challenge when your whole industry, especially pretty glacially moving industries like law and like, accounting, are everybody's used to selling it a certain way and buying it a certain way. And if you're trying to swim upstream, you're not swimming upstream against a trickle, you're swimming upstream against a raging river, right? And so that can take a lot of time. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't disrupt. It does mean like one of the things, like what it is does is it introduces friction. And we don't when you and you know, your thing about educating, you what you were trying to do is eliminate friction before you got to the sales conversation or as much as possible, right? Like, let's take
Amen.
that
Yeah.
friction from here to here. So
And it takes time, like you said.
for sure. I mean, it takes time one way or another. In your case, you were
Yeah.
pouring a ton into content marketing and education and telling people and having them understand the value of it before you got to that conversation, which I think is very smart. But what we're really talking about is this issue of like, you know, when I give advice about good pricing strategy, it should be easy to buy and easy to sell. And people need to be able to understand what the heck you're selling, and they need to be able to buy it. Now, every human in business today has a shorter attention span than they did 5 years ago or 10 years or 20 years ago. So you don't have an hour to sit down and pitch them and explain to them generally a lot of times.
Hour and a half
Yes,
podcast about.
confirmed. Well, they got people gotta drive. They can podcast for an hour, but they don't wanna
Okay.
negotiate, you know,
You're giving me an out.
and a lot of times, you know, in professional services firms, you produce these beautiful proposals and there's all this documentation and a visual of your process and maybe an embedded video. And what do clients do when they get the proposal? They slide straight to the last page and look at that number, right? And so if that number doesn't fit into a preconceived notion of how I'm expecting to buy, it doesn't mean I'm out of the game. It does introduce friction. And how much friction it introduces and how much friction we're willing to let it introduce to let us get to a value-based pricing model, and what else we can do to reduce the friction is really like, you know, all of this is in a miasma together.
Yep.
You
Yep.
add to that the situation you described. I think it was your commercial cleaning client. Like, it's harder than it was a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I mean, like, pre-pandemic, things were the way they were. Then there was a pandemic, and you know, got impossible to procure product, labor shortage, you know, all the challenges of producing the product and service. The question during that time was less, how much does it cost? And more, when can I get it? How soon can you start the
Well, and
project?
there was all the
How,
free money in the system town, and now you got all those same problems and
right.
less
There's
money
less
in it.
money in the
Yeah.
system, but there's also,
Yep.
you know, some cooling off of some industries. I
Yep.
wouldn't go so
Yep.
far as to say recession, but certainly some cooling off of demand. Customers are holding their cash more tightly because there's less of it to go around. And so deal cycles are lengthening. And your competitors, and I'm speaking to your listeners now, are getting more desperate because they're seeing a pie. It's not ever expanding, it's possibly shrinking. And so when the pie is shrinking, people start grabbing for scraps and they start throwing irrationally low prices out there. And what I would caution your listeners to do is not to like grab for that falling knife. Don't like jump into a price war. Yeah, it's brutal out there. Your client's exactly right. But this is where what worked a year or two ago doesn't work today. Warren Buffett says it's only when the tide goes out you can see who's been swimming naked.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about this is like if someone can prove that they can handle this well, their valuation later on, and because they can prove that they've got a plan over this kind of stuff because they can wait it out and they had a strategy, should increase the company's value.
So one of the things that you know you said about when you were talking about your this education and investment bankers, like that people don't really understand what they do, or you're being compared against somebody who isn't nearly as good as you, but how do you tell that? How do you prove that? How do you show that? Because our price is $27,000 for this set of services and their price is 12,000, or our price is 270,000 and there's this, you know, and what is going on for clients in a in a professional services space is they cannot touch and feel the product. They cannot measure the difference. They cannot know the difference before they've hired you, and they'd have to hire you side by side and be able to compare them. Nobody's going to do that. So they're trying to go out to the market and get quotes and proposals from different service providers, and they're looking at them and they're swimming around in a sea of unverified promises. In other words, everybody promises the same thing. Everybody promises to solve the problem with excellence, with speed, with quality, with blah blah blah, right? And
It's just so ridiculous, isn't it? Unverified promises. Yeah, you're a lot more gracious with your words than I would.
well,
Yeah, it's
but
just
that leaves them in a spot where the only objective difference between proposals that they concretely can wrap their heads around is pricing. The fact is there's a whole bunch of other differences, but those are a lot more nebulous and vague and hard to substantiate because everybody's saying they do the same thing, even though they don't.
well, and it's like multifaceted because it's not only all the unverified promises. Like, let me think out loud here for a second. So, like, there's the outcome that, like, here's what I'm convinced of is the owner operators that you and I work with know the outcome that they want. It's like so obvious. They don't understand to the degree of, like, I mean, net like a net capital working adjustment. Like when you go sell, like what the hell is that? Like, oh, it could cost you $4 million, but they don't know like what that is. And then it's like, okay, well, there's two dudes in suits trying to explain to you why their integrity and all this other shit is going to help you with that. It's like, what? It's like,
I think of it like Shirley Brown's teacher.
yeah,
It's like it
totally.
doesn't mean any, those words mean
Right.
nothing.
But like, right. So there's like the outcome that they want. And like, what I like, so like it's so obvious. Like I have to freaking pay payroll. I got to pay my vendors. I got to do my shit. And like gravity and reality is always the outcome is always responsible by the business owner. Like they have to keep going, but all these other people aren't responsible for the goddamn outcome. So then what happens is they can get in there, suck off the system and not be responsible for getting that outcome. So there's that disconnect, but then there's also, they don't understand, I'm like, you and I were talking about the healthcare system. I've had to become a PhD in backs because of my wife. Like, I don't want to do that, but I get screwed every single time I go to the freaking doctor. So like, there's just no trust.
Well, I think that's one of the big challenges that your clients that are bringing these questions up are struggling with because their promises aren't bullshit. They mean it. They're good at it. They're good at delivering that. But they're being compared against someone who's doing it for 10% less or 50% less, who's saying they can do the same thing. And the client is not in a great position. You got to consider like the client is like you sitting in that doctor's office. Like all they want is help. And they are trying as hard as they can in a field they're not expert in. That's why they're getting experts to help them. They're trying to go shop for that expertise, and it's very challenging to do that because they're again swimming around in a sea of unverified promises. Everybody's promising the same thing. And this is where I think like if you are that best in class or better in class provider of services, when they come to you and say so and so's 14% cheaper than you, or your price seems too high. I would argue that that's really not the true problem. What they're not saying you're too expensive. They're saying you're too expensive if you're not 14% better. Or more
Or you don't get me to
succinctly,
my outcome. Like, how do you,
that's exactly what I was gonna
yeah.
say. Or more succinctly, you're too expensive if I get done paying you all this money and I don't get what I came for. Right?
I
So the
know. I've
problem
done
isn't
this.
the pricing, the problem isn't the number, the problem is trust, like you said. And so I would argue that and you're in a professional services firm and you're being compared against someone who doesn't do what you do the way you do it and being compared to their price, don't solve the price problem because that's not the problem. It's not the real problem. The problem is trust. They're saying, I don't trust you yet. I don't trust you yet. And that doesn't mean, rush in and match a price. That means help them understand through, and it depends on what you sell and who you sell to and how it's sold and how you deliver. Sometimes it's about quality and it's, you've got to give them some kind of, understanding of your process. Sometimes it's about speed and you can share past performance. Sometimes it's about like, honestly, like content marketing education that you mentioned is a really important one. But very often it's just spending more time. What's very interesting in a professional services space is good professional services companies can't get there without being consultative sellers. They don't just, to kind of pull in a medical analogy, nobody shows up to their office and says, my elbow hurts, I need surgery, and they rush them off to the surgeon. No, they're like, tell me about that. Tell me about your pain. Tell me about your symptoms. Let's see if we can get to the root causes, because sometimes you don't need surgery, you need physical therapy, right? And so they've done this really good job, the whole early part of the sales process, of communicating value, not through what they tell customers, but through what they ask them, and being an empathetic, trusted expert in the room about the problem and how we're going to co-create a solution that's specific and tailored to you and your needs and your pain. But then the second price comes into the conversation, we drop from being that super consultative seller on a peer-to-peer basis. We drop down to this sort of transactional kind of conversation where now we're talking about numbers. And it's like, that's never the thing. None of your clients, my clients, anybody in the world who's looking for professional services help would want to save 14% and not get their problem solved. I'm going to save money, but it's going to be a shitty result. Nobody chooses that. Nobody's ever chosen that in the history of
I
mankind.
know.
The
I
reason they
know.
do it is you've not made a compelling case that they're gonna get a result that is not shitty. So deal with
I
that.
literally was talking to my buddy Jimmy Fritz, who's got some of these questions. He's like, I would pay more if they just did their goddamn job.
100%. 100 Every one of us has turned money, and this is what we gotta remember when we're in the sales seat. Every one of us has been a buyer, where we've turned a pile of money over to someone who made a big promise about how they were gonna make our life better, and you'd have been better off setting that money
Right.
on fire in the yard.
Because you didn't go through the headaches and
Yeah,
everything like
right.
that. You could have had your time.
You'd have only lost money. Instead,
Well,
you
and no, time. Well,
no,
and
if you
time,
burned
actually,
it.
I think
If you
it's,
burned it in the
yeah.
yard, you'd have only lost money. That would have been better.
No, right. Like, yeah, no, right. Because you saved your time.
Your
Yeah.
time, your
Yeah.
headache, your hassle, the goodwill of your
Yeah.
team who you drug with you on this journey, all the things.
Which now you have less trust with your team
For
because they,
sure.
yeah,
And you got
100%.
to start over. And so then there's the opportunity cost, because what didn't get done in the last 6 months, you were effing around with this professional service provider. Sorry. I
No,
tried,
no,
man,
no.
but you
You
got
didn't
the
say. You didn't
F-bombs,
even.
and I'm a truck driver's daughter from the wrong side of the track.
You didn't say
I
it.
know,
You're
I
better
was
than me.
close though. I was close. No, but and this is, every buyer knows that pain. Every one of your
Yeah.
clients who sells has been a buyer, has been on the receiving end of that. And so what I would ask people to contemplate is, what is it like to be like, have that top of mind when you're in a sales conversation? And in the best way to convince someone of your value is not vomit value messaging at them. That's a
Or reduce
monologue.
price because it actually like doesn't. I mean, like I watch like people that will drop their price and you're like, I don't even trust you because
No,
like if you think about
don't
like
trust.
what's right. Well, and at the end of the day, it's about showing that you can do the hard things when the time is required. And if you can't prove your worth based on the outcome, then connect it to the outcome and you're just dropping your price, you're actually just proving that like when the shit hits the fan, you're probably just going to hit the easy button.
Well,
And I just,
100%. And I've got a blog. I'll send you the link for this too. But it's like the reality is, when you sell a professional services firm, the service starts at the very beginning of the sales process. And by that, I mean, they get to see your expertise on display before they've hired you. They get to see you lead. They get to see you have a strong point of view about the solution, that you didn't just rush them off into surgery, that you actually took time to diagnose their pain point. And if you're sort of being a peer at that table and a trusted advisor, takes a enormous hit. Your credibility goes to zero if the second you get a little price pressure.
you know what I think is the part of this problem, Casey? Alex Hermazi, do you follow him at all? I gotta send it because it's part of our speakers group. I was like, this guy. I mean, he's just next level. He says, "Wake up, do shit." Number two, wake up and talk about the shit you did. I was just like, because what the problem is, people are going to number two, which is wake up and talk about shit, but they didn't do it. And so what happens is all these thought leaders and blogs, and like, not only are they not like responsible with their pay to the outcome, they've never even done the thing that they're promising, which then is filtering through the okay. So I that's a whole rabbit hole in itself, but I think that's just part of the problem.
And from a pricing lens, I would make the following adjustment to the advice. I agree with it, but like, wake up, do shit, and then talk about the shit you did. And by that, I mean the following: being great and delivering great products and services is not the whole answer to pricing success. You can have the best product or service in the world. If the customer doesn't understand it, believe it, connect with it, you're going to struggle to be paid the price you're worth. So, a way I say this is, customers will never pay you what you're worth. They'll only ever pay you what they think you're worth. And the bad news there is that too many companies sort of abdicate responsibility for kind of controlling that thinking, for directing the customer's thinking of their value. So you've got to communicate that value. And I'll make up another
Mhm.
statistic. It's only my second one, so I've still got a few to go.
I love it.
50% of getting pricing right is the number itself. What number goes on that spreadsheet, that proposal, that email, that, pitch deck. The other 50% is how you make people feel about it and the context you create around it and the messaging you wrap around it, because they have to understand that number in context. In other words, is $5,000 a lot of money? It's a lot of money for a pack of gum. It's nothing for a house, right? So like in absence of context, numbers mean nothing. And too many companies are sort of sending naked prices out there and hoping the customer, assumes the right context. And they assume that because they're good at what they do and they let the work speak for itself. And I wake up and do shit. So customers are going to know how good I am. And the fact is customers are love them.
They're not.
Super
Yep.
self-absorbed, super busy,
Yeah.
not
They're
worried about
people.
you. They're worried about
Yep.
themselves as they should be. So it's our job to sell ourselves in the right way.
So then how, like, before we move on to some of the further questions, is like getting then to like structured programs outside of the time and billing. And and then also my buddy was talking about scope creep and stuff like that. So how, like, any thoughts about making it easier? And actually, before we move on to that, I think I'm pulling on, like, you and I both read Taki Moore's $1 Million Coach. And just as a final note of what you were saying is like, he says like give away, what is it? What is shit? I'm gonna lose it now. But it's a give away the how and the not, or the how or whatever, and then like charge them for the accountability and execution. So you're just give, like, somehow there's like this pyramid of access. But I think that there's a lot of interesting truths that he has about that. But then he's got his other structures, which are like the black belt, the green belt, that kind of stuff, which are, like per month instead of per hour. And this Aaron, a buddy of mine, he's the one that put me on Taki. So these are the questions coming from him.
Well, I think the wisdom of the idea of like some kind of somewhat predefined packages, right? There are very many professional services firms I know that started as one professional services person who was a great marketer and they went out and hung out their shingle and now they're a marketing firm, or they were a great engineer and now they're an engineering consultant or whatever. And one of the things that plagues them is it takes them forever to put proposals together because every single one is unique. Every single one is I'm starting from scratch and building this bespoke monster. And they all hate how much time they have to spend putting proposals together. And one of the benefits of coming up with some sort of, I like, not to say it's lather, rinse, repeat, because if you're good at what you do in professional services firms, there's always a bespoke nature to delivery, but at least a framework of repeated that you can repeat over and over again.
Well, it's interesting. Like, what you said there is like, so I have built out managed IT service offerings, document management offerings, CFO services and dashboard, and like, I think it's been 4 or 5 different service offerings. And every single time, Casey, and I did this by accident because of this sales process, is like the process framework is the same, but Casey's different than Cindy's different than Aaron. Your problems are different, but like every time we do this and then this and then this and then this for your outcome.
Yes. That does a few important things for the seller, for the professional services firm. One is it speeds up your ability to get a quote to customers because it's like this is how we solve your problem. Now your problem is different than your problem is different than your problem, but this is how we solve your problem. And then there's a mechanism by which we price that. And for some professional services firms, it's like every time we do a discovery audit, it's $12,500. Other companies, it's not always the same price because it might depend on some factors, but at least the framework of the repeatability is there and the framework of how to make a pricing decision for that framework is there. And I think that needs, and time kills all deals. So if you and I have a sales conversation and you hang up and you're pumped up about what I just told you and you have a proposal in your inbox later that day, the odds are much higher that I'm going to make that sale than if it takes me 3 weeks to get your proposal because your brain has moved on. You have
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
other
Totally.
problems, right?
Oh my gosh. I
So
know.
the need to be able to get proposals in front of customers quickly is one good reason to do that. The other thing is, I think it builds confidence. So again, and some of this is like depends on how the maturity of the business. But if you're, the first, let's say 10 years even in business as a professional services firm, if every single time you're reinventing the wheel, how confident can you be, not just on what you're proposing, probably not that, but much more so on the number. It's like The first time that company sold a discovery audit for 12,500, they weren't sure about it. But the 10th time they sold it for 12,500, they were like, yeah, this is a price customers are willing to pay. By the way, my advice to that company is like, after you have 10 yeses, it might be time to start bumping that number. You know, don't we need to be
Back to that 27
right?
grand.
If everybody rushes in and says yes automatically, that's a signal that your price is too low. But that ability to have a framework that is repeated builds confidence in your framework and in your pricing decision making about the framework. Now, I will say one thing real quick, and then I know you have a whole pile of more questions you want to move on to. But this question of packages or levels, like there are lots of people who, and they cannot tell you where it comes from, are rooted in a belief in a services industry. Like I got to be able to give them three options, you know, a good, better, best, a low,
The middle
medium,
one,
high.
Casey. It's always the middle one.
Oh, I know. And they want to tell me about these, Harvard Business Review studies. And look, they're out there, but almost all of the research that's out there is actually in a B2C model, and a consumer pricing decision making process is very different than business. Now, I'm not saying don't propose good, better, best. I'm not saying never do that, but I would like to offer the following cautions to anybody who's out there always proposing options. One is customers love to choose, humans love to choose, right? I don't know if it's dopamine or
Freedom. I have some control over my life, Casey.
Right. Yeah. Like we get a little dopamine hit when we get a chance to choose something. But if we are presented with too many options, or those options are too complex, it actually can paralyze us from making a decision, and it can kill the sale. Like think about if you go buy a car this weekend, there's 3 trim packages. You don't individually decide, do you want the upgraded radio and the fancy rims and the sunroof? And those are bundled together by somebody who knows more about that stuff than I do. And they're saying, do you want the L, the XL, or the SXL? And here's the dollars, right? We've got to simplify choice. Otherwise, we kill the sale. That's one caution I would advise. And the second is, remember that they're coming to you because you're the expert. So if you just lay out a buffet of options and say, what do you want? You're abdicating expertise. You're abdicating your role as the trusted advisor to say, here are a couple of options for you. Here's the one I recommend. Here's why I recommend it. Here's the pros and cons of this option. If this doesn't feel like a fit to you because the cons are too important to you, or the budget is
because their outcome, right, and you're just helping them pick it.
Here's a second option I would propose to you. Here's why I don't love it for you. Here's why I didn't put it in front of you over this one, but I think it could really be an excellent choice for you. Now, all of a sudden, you are not just giving them choice and giving them that little dopamine hit. You are not just laying out a menu like they've gone to the buffet line and they're deciding between mashed potatoes and mac and cheese. They're like, no, the mashed potatoes are the right. You want
because I you know what I'm trying to accomplish. Yes. You know what my objections are.
You
okay,
so elevate yourself as a guide as you curate a very limited.
It is nice to have choices, but I want choices that were thoughtful based on my outcome, based on my trust. So so the people watching YouTube, I'm just gonna show Casey something because this is like my favorite story. So okay, before I share. So last year I was getting my home remodel, Casey, and I was the idiot that was like, I'm going to quasi GC this, because I know so much shit about it. You already know.
Oh, brother.
I'm still married. It went from a 6-month project to 2 years.
Oh, my God.
Long story. Everybody's been through this, or they've watched a friend go through this. Okay, so my freaking contractor was like, all right, Ryan, because this is exactly what I should be doing with my time, is what I'm about to say.
Yeah, so for sure. This
stop the roll. Yeah, stop the roll.
Cost, for sure, the right way for you. $1 million of your.
So he goes, well, while you're out, can you grab me some adhesive? And I was like, I can do that, because I've got the, he's doing. I can't remember if he was doing my deck or my bathroom at this time. So I go, I go to the hardware store, Casey, and I took a picture of this. I said to my wife, I was like, F me. He said, get some adhesive. So everybody that's listening, and I am showing a picture of an entire aisle at Home Depot of adhesive. And I was like, what the F? I said to my wife, I go, this is what my clients must feel like when I was like, just do this. And it's but I think, Casey, I always used to say, you have as many options as you want to do. You can do whatever you want. And it's it just does, I looked at that and I was like, I want to shoot myself in the face right now. I was like, I'd rather pay him
For sure.
10
Like an
times more
hourly
money.
rate of whatever to go to the Home
Yeah.
Depot and buy that versus the thing is that's so important about what you just said is like and I see this sin especially in sort of early stage business ownership because people are dying for somebody to cut them a check. Like, we have not necessarily gotten the confidence yet to have that, strong point of view because the customer comes in and says, "My elbow hurts, I need surgery." And we're just like,
Mhm.
"God,
Sure.
that number that check would be so nice. I'll do surgery. I'll figure it out." But, like, what the customer needs is physical therapy. And so, like, we have to be firm enough in our own expertise to diplomatically and respectfully push back on the customer. And I'll tie that together with what you just said, which is we kind of have a whatever you want mentality sometimes because it's like we need the sales, we have a team to keep busy, or we have, $100,000 of payroll I got to make every month and cash flow is
Mhm,
keeping
mhm.
me alive and I've got to. So we get hungry for the sale. And so then we want to be anything to anybody. But my firm belief,
What do you want your doctor to say? What would you like,
because
Casey? Wait a second, you're the
I
doctor.
can prescribe anything you want. No, for sure. We need the expert. And so it
Oh.
takes some real discipline to do this. But I've seen this in my own business, and I've seen this in countless professional services firms. The more you are an expert, and you curate very specifically inside your lane. Here's what you need. Here's how I can help you. Here's how you can have the outcome you want. Do this thing, the better we get. And I say that because another problem I see in professional services firms is we sort of leak outside our own area of expertise because they're willing to pay us for it. Because hey, I already trust Casey.
They're
She
willing to
did it
pay us for it, or we're trying to, like, from fear, keep
for
the
sure. We're trying
trusted
to keep the
advisor
dollar
perspective of the
for
owner,
sure.
or whatever it
So,
is.
like,
Yeah.
example for my business is somebody's worked with us for a pricing program and they loved it and they got a ton of value out of it and they're great. They're like, "Oh, Casey, do you do sales compensation planning? Because you worked with our sales team. Can you help us?" It's like, no, I don't do that. By the way, now I know who to send them to because of your podcast. But it's like I don't do that. And if you hire me and it's like sometimes they trust me so much, they're like kind of like, "Here, take my money." But if we take money for something that is not inside the blue part of our flame, we are going to regret it. And I have done it early in my years. You might have done it too. Like
So
you take on
I,
business
I've been
you
there.
have no business taking on, but that money is
Yeah.
shiny and exciting. And you're like, I want to help these guys. And I don't, but the more specific, the more firm we are in our expertise and in our guidance of our customers, we will make more money, not less. We will win more deals, not fewer. We will have customers trust us more, not less. And sometimes that means letting the customer walk away because you don't do what they want or you don't do what they have a preconceived notion of what it needs to look like. Don't take the wrong business. You will
Yeah,
be
it's
paying that
I
price
and
forever.
I think as we move on to a couple of these other ones, just like I just so strongly believe that understanding what you need at the floor, not to negotiate from the floor, is so important. Because like Casey, like I remember like 10 years ago when I started into the advisory space, which I despise because I love being an operator first, is like how many people will steal your time. And until I actually started doing my bullet journal and I block my time and all this stuff, like everyone would want to meet with you. But it's like, so it's like this truly like, it's like almost like a spiritual thing where like the moment you trust your time and what you value, I mean, that's the leap of faith. And then things start happening the right way. But I think pricing is the same thing. But like, until you know what you want from your time and your cash flow, what you want, like, you can't change that dynamic. Otherwise, everybody's going to steal from you.
Well, 100%. And to thread that back to something I was just talking about, I think that it seems counterintuitive to people that the less I'm willing to be flexible with the customer, the more money I make. Like, no, 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 I gotta do what they want. I gotta give them all these options. Like, no, the less flexible, and I don't mean flexibility like, personality-wise or anything. I mean in terms of being pulled off your center and being pulled outside of what you know is the right way to deliver the outcome. The more rigid you are about being, like, pathologically committed to your customer getting the outcome, even if it means disagreeing with them, the the more customers are gonna say yes to you because your trust will go up. It's like it feels like you're shrinking your market, but you're not.
Yeah, because like Joe Brown, who I had on my podcast when we were talking about money and time and everything like that, is like because I'm so stuck on how important time is, but like time is the first thing. It's the biggest constraint. 168 hours. We're alive in this meat suit for 90 years or whatever. And he said each one of us, time is our most valuable resource, and it's the least valuable thing.
To somebody
Our
else.
time is the
Right.
least valuable thing by everybody else.
I thought that was a
They'll
really
gladly
good
steal it.
comment. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's so true. Well, you have that all the time because you have people, because you're a person out there with influence and tons of people know who you are, where people are like, Ryan, can I pick your brain? Could I take you to lunch?
Oh,
And it's like,
shit. I hate that comment so much. And by the way,
or can I
okay.
take you to lunch, Ann? And it's like, dude, I will buy my own $19, pasta dish. Like,
what's it called? Money.
More than $19.
So before we move on, I got to tell the story. Is when you and I were in our speakers group and you just spoke at one of the conferences that I also spoke at, and when I found out like what I charged and what you charged, I was like, I suck. And then watching our friend Alan here talk about what he charged at EOS and what you charged, I was like, so like I've seen it in real time. You do this shit, and so you are talking about the stuff you do.
Yeah, you gotta eat your own cooking, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, the first of all, I got to drop a note of like my buddy Jimmy saw you at Allied, and he was talking about you had convinced him to add shipping, which dropped $500K to his bottom line.
Oh, tell Jimmy my address, and I'd be happy to take a little check.
Yeah, I think Jimmy, her commission is 50%.
No, man, I'll take 10. That's good. I'm good. I'm good with that.
Reed had asked, like, is there a strategy for low pricing and discounting that makes sense? So given like all the stuff that we talked about, when does certain, and I when him and I were texting back and forth, I don't know, contribution margin, if that's one of the things that you talk about, or
yeah, that's
I poked the bear the wrong way.
No, it's not. It's just, oh gosh, I really like, we need a year-long masterclass of pricing. You need to be there because it'll be fun, and we'll make companies $1 billion. Like, there's so much richness to this topic. All right. First, this question of like discounts. And so obviously I'm pretty anti-discount, but I'm not anti-discount.
No, I would have never guessed.
Yeah,
I would
right?
have totally.
But I'm not anti-discount. Like, my message is not never, ever, ever price concede, never, ever, ever discount. Like, it's just that third made up statistic in under an hour, not bad. 97% of discounts are unnecessary. Made that up, but I'd bet my house I'm within a standard deviation. That was a little statistics jokes for you there.
I liked it.
So
number one way to lie is with statistics.
Yeah, right. That's what's it? Mark Twain. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So where was I? I got lost in my joke.
Yeah, sorry. What?
It wasn't even that funny. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I'm not saying never discount, but they're done too quickly. They're done too deeply. They're done too broadly, and they're done from a place of fear. So in other words, if you have a very aggressive customer opportunity in front of you and you've given them, let's say your manufacturer, because we've talked a lot about services business, I want to bring a manufacturer in, and you give them a quote and there's these, 11 prices on that. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is too pricey. And a lot of manufacturers, the way they make pricing decisions is margin targets, right? So like, this is a really aggressive opportunity. We got a 20% margin on there. And the customer comes back and says, this is too pricey. You're too expensive. It's like, okay, let's drop to 15. Well, first of all, do you need to drop to all the way to 15, or could 17 to get the job done? Right. And second of all, do you need to drop to 15 or 17 on every single product? Because not every product on that quote is equally price sensitive. There may be one or two that are the bulk of their buy that are really driving the numbers for them. They're really focused in on. And so that's the too broad and the too deep. Too quickly, like the second the customer comes back and says, your number's too high, I got a competitive quote that's cheaper than yours. You don't have to be the lowest, but you have to be in the ballpark. Like, we jump right into solving the price problem. But it's like, okay, well, what if they are cheaper? Help me understand, why are we still having this conversation? Or like, let's imagine
And
we
why do you need that? Why do you need the discount?
right, like,
Right?
I
You
would
know,
say, like, anytime price pressure is a buying signal. If a customer comes back and pushes on you about pricing, they're saying, "I'm interested in buying from you." If they weren't interested in buying from you, they wouldn't waste their time pushing on you. So the fact that they're pushing you for better pricing means I'd like to buy your products and services. So let's use that power that they're indicating that, that means we have some pricing power over them, which means we can use that power to kind of crack open that conversation and uncover what's behind the buying signal. So instead of rushing right in and saying, okay, I could do it for, let's say this is 17.49 a pound. Say I could probably do it for 16.49 a pound, rather than rushing in and solving the price problem. Like, understand why they're asking you. So for example, like, okay, I understand you have several other quotes that are cheaper than yours. Let's imagine for a second, just like, let's wave a magic wand over these quotes and imagine there was zero price difference between them. Who would you choose? Well, they're going to choose you. They just
ooh, I like that.
well, thank you. I mean, this is my craft. So let's imagine, and so then they say, "Well, I'd choose you," right? Because otherwise, if they wouldn't choose
Why
you,
are they
you don't have
talking
a
to you?
price problem. Those guys are cheaper, but you're better. If they were cheaper and better, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'm talking to you because they're cheaper, you're better. So they say, I'd go with you. So then you say, and some version of this, and you find your own authentic way to ask this, like a version of like why, right? And so it could look like, hey, so when I come back to you with a revised proposal that really meets your needs, and I make sure I don't take anything out that you care about. And what is it about what we've proposed? Our products, our services, our team, our structure, our process, our whatever that has you say we'd be the choice if the price were the same. And then shut up and listen to it, because there's something that is behind their buying signal. Now, sometimes, your customers aren't idiots, right? Like, they're not going to be like, well, they're cheaper, but they can't deliver it until next March and I need it tomorrow. Like, they're not going to hand you the pricing power, right? But they're smart, and they're cagey with their information, but your listenership is smart too. So like, we got to the key is engage them in a dialogue to understand the buying signal instead of rushing right to discount. So I said too quickly, too deeply, too broadly. I've already explained those three. And the fourth one we talked about at the top of the hour, which is this issue of it's done out of fear. We're afraid to lose the business. And I would say key on the fact that the customer is giving you the compliment of price pressure. They're giving you the buying signal. Mine some confidence from that, not to root yourself in fear, and to get into a dialogue with the customer about their needs, rather than a monologue of just values, crap.
Yep. Yeah. That's all amazing, Casey. And like, so if one of the interesting things that I heard from ITR Economics when I was talking to Brian on my show like last year, when they were talking about, so let's say if you did everything that you just mentioned, and then if like what's the reciprocal negotiation? So we were talking about like, okay, if there's a discount, do you go back for them better payment terms? Because I think the conversation with Butcher Joseph and ITR was like balance sheet battles. We're trying to use other people's money. And so it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this discount, can I get the cash up front? Because there's a opportunity cost for me. But then he was talking about even like pinning your like interest, or pinning your cost of your price to, instead of the CPI, to the purchasing manager index or something like
PPI,
that. So
the
you're getting a
purchase
spread
price
on the
index,
inflation. And so like you're essentially going back and saying, I will do this, but then you do this. And then like if you're just outsmarting them, there's a different way to get some leg up in that current discount at request.
Well, so I would say terms. In other words, when you get the money is a function of price. It is a discount. If you give somebody longer terms, you're giving them a discount because you're funding
Hmm.
their capital, right? And
Hmm.
if you give
Hmm.
sooner terms, it's essentially clawing back some of that price. So those two are mathematically related, of course, at any given time by the magnitude of the discount, the magnitude of the change in terms, and the cost of capital at that time. So there's a mathematical relationship there. So anybody who thinks giving up terms is not giving up price, listen to me loud and clear. You are discounting. You're doing it in a different way. Stop doing it. But the sort of more macro point I wanna point to around that, so yes, absolutely to that advice, but I would say that there's two things going on there. Like, the transactional version of this is essentially a give to get. Like, if I do this, then I need this in return, and I think that is a super important concept. We call that give to get, in our business, and it's important because if we talked about this before. If I say, "Hey, Ryan, I want your stuff," and you say, "Okay, you can have XYZ and it's 10 grand," and I say, "I only have 8," and you go, "Okay, I can do it for 8." You've just cost me not to trust you because you were fleecing me and I pushed on you and then you gave me the real price. You were just trying to get away with something, right? So unearned discounts hurt trust. If we change the price without changing the deal in any fashion, it hurts trust. So give to get is important for what I call price integrity. And I don't use integrity here in a moral sense, more in a structural sense. Like if you have a house on pillars and you pull one pillar out, the house topples over, right? You've got to make adjustments on both sides to maintain balance. And so that give to get is super important, not just for the financial aspect, but also for the trust aspect. And I will say that terms is just one of very many things we can do to give to get. I mean, there can be a scope change, like, okay, we're not going to be able to, but I can have two people on site. I can have one person on site. I can't do the best level of stainless steel. I can have one, but I need 100% of the payment up front is one of them. There's other ways, like, hey, I've been trying to get a meeting with the other division manager of your business for 6 months. The guy won't return my call. If you can secure me a meeting with that guy, I will, blah,
Rock
blah, blah.
on. I love it.
Or,
Yeah.
if you will write me a testimonial, I can post on my
Right.
website. Like sometimes you can ask people for something that does not cost them money, that is easier for them to give up, but that has a high value to you. And this is now we're kind of getting into some sort of rudimentary negotiation strategy.
Yeah, but I think it's all good reminders that this is. I mean, it's at the end of the day, we're negotiating trust and time and money.
That's
I mean,
right.
like so, like
It's all
there's
tied
just all
together.
different ways
That's
of.
right.
Yep.
And what might be low value to you could be very high value to me. So if it takes you 15 minutes to write me a testimonial that is going to open a door for me because somebody knows and trusts Ryan Tansom, and I can take that testimonial and say, look what Ryan said about our work together. That might open a door to $100,000 of business for me, right? So your 15 minutes, now you're very protective of your time, rightfully so. But if I gave you a discount for that 15 minutes, I go, okay, now we're the calculus here is time, money, value. That's what this calculus is. And we need to, and underpinning all of that is trust. We never, ever, ever want to hurt trust, which is why we should never give a discount without changing the deal or asking for something in return.
And then going back to, I'm a broken record here, which is you have to know what you want and trust in yourself before you can actually go ask it from other people, because then you're not going to know how to even have that conversation unless you are rooted in some sort of foundation. Before we move on to the next part, curious if you have any thoughts on one of the biggest dysfunctions I see with its pricing, but it's internal, Casey, is I'm the rock star. I come to you, Casey, and I say, hey, I got a different offer and I'm going to go from $1.25 or whatever from you to someone else is willing to pay me $1.75 or whatever. Even if it's 75 grand to 100 grand. And then someone goes, okay, we'll match it. And I have seen this shit so many times. I'm like, even if I was that employee and I wanted that, you have been screwing me over as an employee forever. Any thoughts about how to handle that pay raise increase dynamic, or is that?
Remember when I said before, you got to know when to stay in your lane? Like this is not my
that's not your lane.
I do think, in essence, like salaries and compensation is a form of pricing because somebody is selling their time and talent and expertise or their labor or whatever it is they do, for you for a price tag. And so at the end of the day, it is a pricing negotiation. And there's some of my experience that's relevant there, but it's a super unique.
Well, and I just think, fair enough. I won't, but I think everything we just talked about is relevant
For sure.
to that, because you're just eroding the trust.
Right.
Good luck going forward with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Okay. So,
I can't help myself. Somebody can always go find more money somewhere. Like that will be true forever, no matter what the economy's like. Super talented people could go find a job at a higher price. If you're always willing to match that price, out of the gate. And I'm not suggesting try to underpay your people. Hear me, my message is not see what you can get away with, underpay your people. But
you're just trying to keep the trust. That's all you're trying to do.
And I would say this is true when you buy, when you sell, whether you're selling your labor and talent or a widget, or you can always throw money at the wrong problem. Don't throw money at the wrong problem. Usually the problem is not money.
If we were the same, well, back to just even one question.
If I were to match that price, are you saying you'd stay? Why would you stay here? Why would we be the employer of choice if the price weren't if the salary weren't different? We got to understand more always. Because it's almost
if we were the same price, why would you go with them? Yep. So, and we've covered most of the ground here. Is
Go back to
Uh,
contribution margin. You want to make
yeah,
recap?
we can do that. And I think this next one ties into it, which is um, really like what data what should owners be paying attention to? So let's say they're doing all this stuff, and I think contribution margin kind of ties into that because like let me finish my thought. Sorry, is is we're looking at our financials and we're doing kind of budget to actual, and let's say we're like really managing it the way we want to, and we start to see margin erosion. And I got a client dealing with margin erosion, and so like what KPIs should we be looking at to start to see, are we dealing with pricing problems, or what trends should we be getting ahead of?
So I have a somewhat unsatisfying answer to this. And it's because the numbers aren't what's happening on your income statement isn't the only or even the primary reason we should be looking at price. And that means the numbers on that sheet they're certainly not complete, and I would argue they're missing they're missing the point. And so let me start with the end in mind, and then I'll work back to the numbers. So I always tell people there's two times you can increase pricing and address pricing. Only two: whenever you can and whenever you must. So let's deal with the second of these first, the must. Like this kind of gets to your floor thing, right? So in other words, like we've had margin compression. There comes a point when margin is compressed so far, like you can't do that. Like some businesses will lose bit money for a while, but like at event, there will come a point where you're at the end of your rope and you say, we can't do this business anymore. And a client you would have never been willing to let go before, you are backed against the wall and you have to say, if you will not pay X, we have to stop serving you. And plenty of businesses had those kind of conversations in the past couple of years because of how crazy inflation was, and had unprecedented, previously inconceivable conversations with clients, willing to let them walk away. Some of them did, and plenty of them stayed and paid it because they had to. Margins had gotten to the point, their costs had gotten to the point where they had to do it. And so, in that case,
Which should back to your point, they found out their floor before
right.
knowing their
They were
floor
sure
because
the floor was there, but they right. They're sure their floor was in a different place. And this is what I
right,
say all the
interesting.
time.
Yep.
People say, like, whether you're a salesperson, a sales leader, an owner, like they don't want to march off a cliff. They want to exercise as much pricing power as they can. They want the customer to pay them as much as possible, but they're scared their toes are on the cliff. And if they take a step forward, they're falling off and they're going to lose all the volume. My experience over 25 years and plenty of financial and economic cycles is that cliff is across the room. You're like inching one step at a time out of fear, and you're not anywhere near the point where you're going to have this massive volume cliff. So I'd say, and plenty of businesses, to your point, found that out when they took a step that they thought was going to, have tons of customers running for the door, and nobody left. All the time when I talk to clients about price increases and how'd you do that? Well, they spent 6 months, wringing their hands or in Excel and mapping out, and then they did the price increase and it was crickets. Nobody. And it's
Yeah.
to me, that's a red flag because it's like, shoot, man, how much money did you leave on the table? First of all, you should have gone 6 months earlier. Second of all,
Mhm.
you didn't ask for enough because you need to have some customers lose when you increase prices, or you didn't ask for enough, and you need to go again. By the way, right? So that's the when you must.
Can I ask a question before you keep going? Is like, what happens if you have clients or customers that find out what each other are paying as you're doing that? Sorry, I don't know if
No,
that
it's all right.
completely derails
I'm
you.
going to circle back to that.
Okay,
I'm
that's
gonna
fine.
circle
Yep.
back. So the must is I'm not making any money or enough money to sustain this, which is kind of your, like, how do we know? What do we should we be paying attention to? What are the metrics? And it's things like contribution margin, gross margin, net margin. At the end of the day, there isn't a rule I can say to your audience. If your margin drops below X, that's the time to take action. Or when your margin drops X%, because that's fundamentally a function of risk tolerance, which is very personal, industry and economic situation, which is very dynamic. Now, in an individual conversation, I can help guide someone to making a better
Because you're
decision.
learning more about the
Sure.
context of
But at
what
the
they're
end of the
looking
day,
for.
there are metrics where those metrics fall below a point which is acceptable to them, and then they take action. That's the must. The problem I have with a metric driven approach to that is that ignores the vast majority of the opportunity they have, which is when they can. In other words, when they're underpriced relative to the value they deliver. In other words, all of the must is rooted in floor-based decision making. Best in
Back to the
class and
fear.
better in class
Back to the
companies
fear.
shouldn't be doing that very much of the time. They should be really
Hmm.
focused on the ceiling, which is driven by the can. Now, let me circle
Hmm.
back to the
Hmm.
question you just asked me, which is what happens when clients find out what each other are paying. Now, this is again pretty industry specific. So they're like, if you sell a pen, right? Like you sell the exact same pen, manufacturers and distributors are in this space, right? Where it's like multiple different customers could buy the physical exact same product for the for different prices. Now there's
Hmm.
regulatory and legal considerations for this. I am not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. So if you have questions about the legality of your pricing, then you should talk to an attorney. But there are legal defensible reasons to charge different prices to different customers, and companies do it all the time and stay inside the bounds of Robinson-Patman and the Sherman Act and all the other antitrust legislation that exists to protect businesses and consumers from predatory pricing practices. So it is legal and defensible to charge different prices to different customers. I would say, and on the services side, it's such a less big issue. Not that it doesn't matter at all, but very often there are much more ostensible differences between what people are buying.
Well, because we talked about already, they're having a complicated process, even explaining what they're doing, let alone, comparing the two.
To go to one of your prior businesses, like a managed IT services, it's like, well, these guys are paying $12.50 a month, and these guys are paying $8.50 a month. Well, user counts different, servers different,
Yep, yep, yep.
provided, covered applications is different, whatever, right? So it's a lot easier to defend it, and it's not nothing, but it's easier to explain that. What I would say, way in advance of customers finding out that they're paying different prices, your reason for differentiating pricing between customer A and B needs to be fair, rooted in logic, and defensible. If it ended up getting out into the world, if it ended up on the newspaper, if it ended up that these two customers talk to each other, you want to be able to explain from a place of fair and defensible why those prices are different. And now, that does not mean I think you should lead with that. Like, don't put that information on the street that's not there. But if
But
it
just make sure
gets
that you can look
that's
in the
right.
mirror,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah,
And that is
yeah.
also, by the way, really important to making sure you have a legal defense if you ever did run up against, run afoul of somebody saying, "Hey, this is against regulation." But you your pricing should never be rooted in a whim, and it should never be rooted in, let's see what we can get away with, because you will get
Hmm.
caught speeding, you will get caught with your hand in the cookie jar. I am
Such
a
a good analogy.
huge fan of every company who's listening to this, who I ever encounter in a keynote or anywhere. Get paid as much as you possibly can for the value you deliver. I have never once and never will give advice. See what you can get away with. See what whatever customer, like, this isn't about manipulation,
It's
greed,
about value.
gouging,
It's about
taking
value.
advantage.
Yep.
No, never charge more than you're worth, but charge every penny of what you're worth. And the problem is almost never companies out there charging too much. It's charging too little. And so most all of my messaging is always like, raise your prices, raise your prices, raise your prices, because everybody thinks their toes are on the cliff and they're not. But we have to be really clear about the value and the value differences of customer A versus customer B, and make sure that there's a fair and defensible approach to that. So if a customer ever came to me, and believe me, it has happened, and said, "I found out you charged X to my buddy in the same trade association I'm in, and now you're telling me you're going to charge me, 1.5x." If you don't have a good answer for that, then you should have never proposed 1.5x in the first place. And I have a good answer for it, and I explain the answer to the client, and that particular client didn't buy. I've had 10 other examples where that happened and the client did buy. By the way, the client didn't not buy because of the price, but
Yeah.
you
It's
have
just,
to be able
I
to
think
explain it.
bingo. It's so much of this is
Back to trust and fairness.
knowing your worth, knowing what you want so you can explain what you want. I mean, honestly, Casey, you know what I've been doing over the last 6 months since I've been off on my own and you and I've been talking about this stuff is like, I said to everybody, hey, I'm taking on 15 clients at this price because that's where my time then becomes a different situation. And then after this, I'm going to have a whole nother conversation with the next level because I don't want any more than 20 clients. And I'm just literally explaining that to people and and it just, because it was thought through, it felt good to me. And I've had people saying I'm underpricing right now, but I'm like, it's okay because it works for me.
Well,
And then I want to be able to then hit what's that?
let's generalize the wisdom of what you did, right? And so because there's plenty of people listening that are not going to go out on their own and build a Ryan Tansom like business, but they do have because I get this question a lot. Hey, we're launching this new service or we're launching this new product and we don't know how the market will value it yet.
Mm-hmm,
Which
mm-hmm.
was the situation you were in. Like you
Yeah.
had a sense for the
Amen.
value, right?
Yeah.
You had a sense for the value. You had a sense, but you like every business who launches a new product and service in the history of mankind did some form of educated guessing. Let's
Mm-hmm.
not sugarcoat it. It's guessing because nobody knows. None of you don't know, nor do your clients.
I
Nor
had
does
some
the
proposals
market.
out there that weren't triggering. I'm like, well, shit.
Right.
Like,
So
I could have those out there in the funnel,
this
or I could
is
have the
back to
cash because I'm
that
working with someone.
risk management and mapping our pricing power. Like nobody knows when we launch a new product or service how the market will value it until we try it. And like, let's imagine. Okay, so I say I'm going to do 15 clients at X, and I get 0 people signing up, and I've
How's that working?
communicated and
Right.
I've educated and I got 0. Well, guess what? One of 2 things is going on. Either my price is wrong or my messaging is not connecting. People aren't
Or the value's
understanding
not
why
there.
the
I mean,
yeah,
that could be.
my
Yep.
price is my price is wrong for value,
Yeah.
or
Yep.
people
Fair.
don't connect with it. They don't understand the value enough to pay the price. So,
Yep.
but so then it's like, okay, we have to fix that. Let's imagine a different scenario, which is I said, I'm going to do 15 people at X and it was sold out by lunchtime. Well, then that, it's but probably a signal I could have done 1.5X or 2X or 10X or who knows, or it's somewhere in the middle. Like it's, and so the world is your petri dish. We can experiment with pricing. We must, because until we push up to the limit, we don't know where the limit is. If we sell
But
too much too
it's
fast,
both and because it's like knowing what was sustainable for me or like for a company or division, like you're saying, and then testing the limit because like you're coming at it for like your floor, then you're trying to test it out because like if you get above that and you're hitting the ceiling, you're not doing that. Like,
well, and
all of this is leading
especially in
back.
a services business where what you're selling is your time and you can't like crank up the machine and crank out more Ryans, right? But like fundamentally what you're doing, if I can make the wisdom of your process very transparent to the listeners, is you're evaluating which risk and to what degree am I willing to take? So one risk is I have too many people saying no to me, and then there isn't a lot of money rolling into the Tansom family, for a period of time. That's a risk, and I'm willing to tolerate this much of it for this long. The risk of the other end of the spectrum is I have underpriced myself, and that there's a cost to that. But
Yeah, all of a sudden next year you're managing all these clients and you
sure.
don't have enough money and you can't hire assistants and all. It's just the
So
whole
I talk about, and I have another blog I'll send you about Goldilocks and the 3 prices. Like, Goldilocks is like, it's too hard, it's too soft, this bed's just right, the soup's too hot, too cold, just right, right? Like, we want to baby bear our pricing every time. We always want to get out in that market with that baby bear just right price. But we're guessing and we don't know. We're always going to guess wrong a little bit, maybe a lot, but we don't know. And I would say, like, is it worse to guess wrong a little high or a little low? Or, do you want to papa bear that price or mama bear that price? I make some cases for why it's better to papa bear the price and how to use pricing structures to let you dip down selectively where you need to get it to the baby bear. Because if you
because you
mama
can't
bear
going up is way harder.
so much harder. It is a
Yep.
piece of cake to drop price. It can be done in a heartbeat.
If done the right way, instead of all the things that you
Sure.
just said, you don't go
Yeah.
discount right away. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do it the right,
there's a
elegant
wrong way to do it, but it's always easy.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
easy as
Yep.
pie to lower prices. It's hard to raise them. So I make a case in the blog I'll send you that it's better if you're guessing and you're like, I don't know if we should do X or 1.5X or like whatever. Like I argue that there's a case to be made for Papa Bear pricing in that scenario that allows you to dip down versus it's hard to move up. But at the end of the day, all of that is a function of I am weighing different kinds of risks. The likelihood of that risk and the impact of that risk, and then it's like an expected value calculation.
Right. Right. And I think which like it, so when lens that I think we should all view this through is like in the ownership mindset, as I'm talking about in the independence by design framework, it's time, cash flow, and equity growth. That's the fundamental equation of all of life effectively. And so like what's the time that we have and then how much cash flow are we getting for our time and our energy, and is that growing the wealth? And then it should be this like perpetual like flywheel, and we have to, it's more income today versus more equity tomorrow, or more time versus less cash flow. I mean, so like I think that trade-off is like is the constant lens that we can be viewing all of this through, and the lens that we can view it through. So that way we can, I mean, strive for that ceiling.
This is a perfect
I get,
opportunity to
I
bring
get,
it to contribution margin, actually.
Okay, so Casey, as we're running into the end here, I want you to describe your training process and your training and services, because as you have been talking about all this, I have been watching you as you've been organizing Boost Pricing and as you've been launching CaseyBrown.com. I'm super excited for the things that you have coming out, because I think that there's an interesting way as you continue to scale your services, because I think a lot of people could use, I mean, you dropped $500,000 to my buddy's bottom line.
And
so,
he's never even a client. He's just sat in an
which
audience
is
once.
so cool. And like, that's what I find so enjoyable and just so rewarding with working with you and having the conversations. But like, what are the different ways that people can access you? What is the training program, your services, and like, and honestly, where are you going? And like, how do you see Casey Brown growing?
So thanks for asking that, Ryan. So there's two main ways we work with clients, and then we've got a few other resources beyond those two that I can quickly mention. But the best and most effective way to address pricing in your business is through a program called the Pricing Power Series. It's a 10-week program. It's only an hour a week. It's not this massive. It's not like a 10-week boot camp. It's an hour a week we need from our clients and their sales teams. And in the course of that program, we pull back the curtain on the tactics customers use to get you to discount, and then we arm the sellers and other customer-facing folks and the management of those folks. We arm them with the methods and messaging and tools, and frankly, most importantly, the confidence, because as we said, this is a mindset game, as much or more than anything, to negotiate with customers from a place of strength, not fear, to win more deals at higher prices. So, my sales pitch is pretty simple. If you like money, you should probably call us, because we make it rain from the sky. We make buckets of money rain from the sky. If you like that, we can help you. Our best clients are best in class and better in class companies. So they have a really compelling product or service. They're getting compared against inferior competitors, and they are, frustrated at the sense that there's money left on the table because of that, that kind of competitive pressure, or the market landscape, or the customers pushing on them and comparing them to competitors. So it's a 10-week program. It's an hour a week. We have some specific resources we wrap around the managers of sellers to help support them. One of the reasons that's so important is that sales is the only function that has an enemy to the training success and stickiness. And by that, I mean, like, if you did some training in operations, or you did training in your accounting department, like, there's obstacles to making that stick forever, but there aren't enemies to it. And I would say there are two pretty active forces working against training in sales. One is the customer who wants your stuff for nothing, and the other is your competitor who wants to see you go out of business. So we do training for sales teams to help them understand this better and have the confidence to execute it. And then they go out in the market, and the first thing that happens is a customer punches them right in the face and says, your prices are too high. So there are active forces
Yay, sales!
trying to unwind our training. And so we've designed our training to be very sticky. And I think the reason I say this 10-week program is the way to do it is because that takes some time to do. But the managers have a really important role in terms of reinforcing and supporting and motivating and holding their people accountable to it. And one of the things we hear from a lot of sales managers we work with is that, and we know this to be true, and you know this because you've been in sales your whole life. A lot of people who become sales managers are sales managers because they were great salespeople. Right? Like, they were
Oh, that happened to
natural
me,
at
and
it,
it's the
right?
worst experience ever. I hated
But
being a
not
salesman. It's my least
everybody
favorite job I've ever done.
not everybody who's a good salesperson is a good sales manager, but even the ones
Amen.
who are, or who want to be, very often when they were a really, killer salesperson, a lot of that stuff came pretty naturally to them, right? They just got it, or
Wake
they
up
had
and
to
make
be
the phone calls. That
they
was
had
my
to be
coaching.
told it once, and then they're like, "Okay, got it." Now they're managing people who are not as naturally sort of gifted, or natural at some of these skills and actions. And so they're coaching people, and they're saying things like, just do this, say this, because that's what they did and that's what worked. And then their people won't do it or won't say it, because when they're with the customer, they feel pushy, they feel salesy, they feel weird, they get in their head, they get in their gut, they panic, and they don't do it. And so we are up some resources around the sales managers too, but it's again, it's an hour a week for 10 weeks, and it is guaranteed to pay back, and it will drop a gajillion dollars, that's a technical term, to your bottom line.
Fifth stat of the
Yeah,
day.
yes, right, correct. That is the best way. For clients for whom that is not a fit for a variety of reasons, we do half-day workshops as well. On site, come in person and do a half-day workshop. It is very effective, and for a lot of years, that's all we did, and we still have clients that we did that for that, rave about us. And your buddy who, went to one of those, but not with our company, but a public version of that, made a ton of money from it, so it works. It's just harder to make very sticky change in mindset of sellers in a half a day. You have a little problem of workshop euphoria where people show up and they hear this message and the
Yeah, the
speaker
whole
was
summer
great, it
camp
was
thing.
awesome, and I took a bunch of notes, but you go back to the office and you have 200 emails sitting there, and a week later you haven't cracked the notebook, a month later you haven't cracked the notebook, 6 months later. So it's harder to make sticky change. What I'll tell you is if and I'm for anybody listening to this, I'm holding my hands far apart and saying, if this is all the money that's possible to make through better pricing execution, your ability to get all or most of that relies on sticky change, and so that's why the pricing power series is the way to go. But even if you did the workshop and you got 70% of that or 50% of that, that's still
Mhm.
a half a gajillion dollars, which is a lot. So either way, they're
Uh,
good. And then
yeah.
for clients who don't have a sales team, we have a self-paced online program, and I'm a
Sweet.
fan of the idea of kind of a solution at every price point. So we have tons of free resources on our website and on
And then
LinkedIn.
people that want to have you speak at the trade association.
Oh yeah, that's my
Um,
favorite. My favorite
yeah, and
thing is
she's
to
more
talk about
expensive than
business.
me,
Uh,
apparently. Yeah,
well, hey
apparently.
man, I mean, never hire
More
a pricing
valuable,
consult.
or what?
If you hire a pricing consultant that's cheap, you have made a hiring error.
Yeah, I was gonna
Don't
say that
You need a
it's built
speaker
in.
who I gotta stand in front of the audience and convince them with some credibility to charge
Yeah,
more, and I'm great
yeah.
at it, so you gotta pay for that. But yeah, I love
And
talking at conferences and events, and I have as you mentioned, the relatively new speaker website out, caseybrown.com. Our training programs is through Boost, which is boostpricing.com. But I put out a ton of free resources. So we have a 15-ish dollar book coming out in next quarter. And then we have, sub 100 or sub $1,000 options for small teams or solopreneurs. And then we've got our bespoke training programs from there.
well, and I love where you're headed too, because you and I have been having good conversations about how to scale the content and expertise. I mean, it's hard, and yeah, you and I have had some fun conversations around this, and I just want to say I value you, Casey. This is so much fun. I appreciate you're even coming into my ownership accelerator with my clients in a couple months, and thank you for everything you do. I know it's so much fun.
I love it. I believe that it is a function of justice to be paid for the value you create and deliver. And so my missive to all of your listeners and viewers is, don't accept mediocre pay for excellent work. Command the prices you deserve.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Casey. Go check out the links that we talked about there in the show notes below. Go check out her website, caseybrown.com. If you enjoyed this conversation with Casey, please share this link with a friend. Go on to the podcast player, give it a rating. It would mean the world to me. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will see you next week.